So Chud the Builder's team, specifically a 40-plus-year-old man named Richard Cisco, who runs what amounts to a full-time fan account dedicated to defending and supporting Chud, despite all the racist behavior and harassment that Chud engages in on a daily basis, has completely lost his mind and is now claiming that he is calling the FBI.
He DMs this person and he says, "I have your docs. I just contacted law enforcement and filed reports. Contact the FBI because the docs in coordination with a mob doing it and the same time escalates this federally. Enjoy." So if you guys don't know what he's referring to, right?
And filing reports against Poetik Flakko because of the fact that Flakko has been exposing Chud and his team's dishonesty and harassment campaigns against black people and content creators. Richard Cisco is someone who apparently has absolutely nothing going on in his life. No real job, no real purpose, no real career trajectory, and no real motivation beyond running this pathetic fan account for a racist live streamer who is currently facing serious federal criminal charges related to a shooting incident that occurred outside a courthouse in Clarksville, Tennessee. What makes Richard Cisco's situation so absolutely pathetic and worthy of serious examination is that on any given day, you can go to his Twitter and X account and see him crying and complaining about how the far-right black conservatives like the Hodge twins and Officer Tatum are not supporting Chud enough and are not endorsing him enthusiastically enough, which is an absolutely absurd complaint because these men are supposedly principled conservatives and they have actually refused to defend Chud precisely because his behavior is so indefensible and so egregious that even people who share his far-right political views cannot justify his action. The Hodge twins in particular have been put in a position where they have to choose between defending their supposed conservative principles or defending Chud, and they have chosen to walk away from Chud entirely rather than compromise their credibility by defending someone who is so blatantly racist and so deliberately antagonistic toward black people.
My attention initially because on any given day, you can go to his X account and see him crying and complaining about how, the far-right black conservatives who make these anti-black content, how they not supporting Chud enough and they not supporting Chud and endorsing Chud, and he's sick of it. Now, I made a video about this, and, he took to Twitter and he says, "How dare you ask black influencers that make a living off calling out other blacks for acting blank to defend Chud, defending himself against the kind of black guys these black influencers make a living off of criticizing." So he's telling people like the Hodge twins and Officer Tatum, why not support Chud? Yeah, he's racist, but you racist too.
On a consistent basis. Officer Tatum similarly has refused to come to Chud's defense despite being someone who is generally sympathetic to far-right political positions, which shows just how far beyond the pale Chud's behavior actually is in the eyes of even his ideological allies. When Poetik Flakko made a detailed video explaining how Richard Cisco was desperately trying to get far-right black conservative commentators to support and defend Chud, despite his blatantly racist behavior, Richard Cisco took to Twitter and made a post that essentially said that Flakko was being hypocritical because he makes a living off of calling out other black people for acting black and engaging in self-destructive behavior. And therefore, why should he not be willing to defend another black person like Chud, who is being criticized and attacked by online communities? This argument is absolutely nonsensical and demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of what Flakko is actually criticizing Chud for, because Chud is not being criticized for acting black or for any cultural reasons related to his identity. He is being criticized for deliberately going around calling black people the N-word to their faces and harassing them in public and on social media specifically to try to provoke them into reactions that he can record and broadcast for views and attention and engagement metrics. Do you think that Richard Cisco is genuinely delusional and actually believes that his FBI claims have any merit whatsoever? Or do you think he is deliberately making false threats and wild accusations in order to intimidate Poetik Flakko and get him to stop making videos that expose Chud and his team for who they really are and what they are actually doing? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because Richard Cisco's behavior has become increasingly unhinged and desperate as Flakko's videos continue to gain traction and reach millions of people with evidence that directly contradicts the narrative that Chud's team is pushing to try to rehabilitate Chud's image. The sad reality is that Chud is so despicable and so terrible and so horrible that even the usual suspects, the conservative black commentators who you would normally expect to compromise their principles for absolutely nothing in exchange for attention and relevance, are refusing to defend him and are walking away entirely because his behavior is simply too flagrant and too blatant and too obviously wrong for them to justify applied to their audiences. The Hodge twins, who have spent years arguing that white people should have been allowed to use the N-word and that there is an unfair standard being applied to white people versus black people when it comes to racial language and speech, absolutely refused to defend Chud when they were asked to do so by Richard Cisco and others on Chud's team who were desperately seeking allies. When Richard Cisco reached out to Poetik Flakko and asked him if he would help defend and protect Chud in exchange for relevance and platform access, Flakko responded directly and unequivocally with a no-chance response, which is exactly what you would expect from someone who has watched Chud engage in racist behavior and harassment for months on end and understands the severity and the intentionality behind what Chud is doing. Flakko made it clear that he was not willing to compromise his credibility and his principles by defending someone whose behavior is so blatantly wrong and so deliberately harmful to the black community as a whole. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel because we're going to continue breaking down how Chud's team is responding to the exposure and criticism that they are receiving and how they are using increasingly desperate and extreme tactics to try to intimidate and silence the people who are speaking the truth about Chud and his team's behavior. Subscribe if you want to stay informed about every development in this ongoing situation between Poetik Flakko and Chud's team and how this conflict continues to escalate. Because Flakko said no, and then made videos explaining why he refused to help Chud and why Chud's behavior is indefensible. Richard Cisco absolutely lost his mind and began writing multiple long posts on Twitter and X, essentially lying about Flakko and making defamatory statements about him and his background.
He even asked me to help out Chud. I said no chance. So because I said no chance and covered him asking black folks to help out Chud, he wrote novels upon novels about me on his timeline, lying, defaming me. But I just told him, hey man, you better retract that defamation or else I'm coming. And he retracted all. He issued like 4 retractions that went on another Manic episode, in my opinion. So
Richard Cisco was making posts claiming that Flakko had done various things that he had not actually done, spreading lies and misinformation about Flakko's background and his character and his motivations in a desperate attempt to discredit him and make people doubt the truthfulness of the videos that Flakko was making about Chud.
Not a grand conspiracy. People just don't like racist people. So then look, he continues, right? And he says this. This isn't, okay, so now he's threatening to find this person's address. He says, this isn't 10 years ago. Ask yourself how well connected you think I am. Whatever you say, do whatever you think you should do. But then he continues, okay, more right here. And he goes, I was doxxed weeks ago when I took down Nick Fuentes. All right, man, nobody cares. I just want Flakko to know that I know. You know what? You know what? We got him, bro. Yo, here's the thing, yo. These people have been in 4chan chat rooms their entire life, right? Bullying, antagonizing, harassing black folks their entire life. Black folks, we start fighting back and now they can't take it, right? We start fighting back and now all of a sudden I'm calling the FBI. Y'all, no, this is not fair. Hold on, bro.
Flakko found out about these defamatory statements being spread about him on social media platforms where they could reach thousands of people. He sent Richard Cisco a direct message warning him that if he did not retract the false statements and stop spreading lies about him immediately, Flakko would be forced to pursue legal action against Richard Cisco for defamation and slander and would potentially sue him for damages. The threat of a lawsuit was apparently enough to scare Richard Cisco into compliance because he immediately issued multiple retractions of his false claims about Flakko, backing down from his aggressive posturing almost immediately. What is particularly telling about Richard Cisco's reaction to Flakko's cease and desist threat is that he folded so quickly and so completely, which demonstrates that he knew full well that the statements he was making about Flakko were false and defamatory and would not hold up to any kind of legal scrutiny. If Richard Cisco actually believed the things he was saying about Flakko, he would not have immediately retracted everything and backed down. But instead, he showed his hand and revealed that he was deliberately spreading misinformation in order to attack Flakko. What is absolutely insane about the situation is that after Flakko made his video about Richard Cisco making defamatory statements and lying about him, the community absolutely mobilized and began leaving negative comments on Richard Cisco's social media accounts and calling him out for his dishonesty and his support of racist behavior. The community response was so overwhelming and so relentless that Richard Cisco apparently had a complete mental health breakdown and began experiencing what appears to be a manic episode where he started sending direct messages to random accounts accusing them of being coordinated with Poetik Flakko and being part of some grand conspiracy to attack and destroy him. Richard Cisco received a direct message from a random account that had commented under his post saying something.
This all traces back to him. The coronation is already known. Bro, I know your entire network. I don't kick hornet nests and I don't fully understand. Now, this page got 4 followers. 4!
Something simple like they knew he was working with Flakko or that they disagreed with his support of Chud. And instead of ignoring the comment or responding rationally, Richard Cisco had a complete paranoid meltdown and began sending increasingly unhinged direct messages. In his direct messages to this random account, Richard Cisco started by saying that he knows the person is working with Flakko and is part of his network. And then he escalated to saying that he is absolutely certain that the person is Flakko and that Flakko is running that account and coordinating attacks against him. Richard Cisco's paranoia had reached such a level that he was convinced that every single negative comment that was being left on his social media was part of some coordinated conspiracy orchestrated by Poetik Flakko, using thousands of different Twitter and X accounts working in concert to destroy his reputation. Richard Cisco apparently believed that there was no way regular people could just organically dislike him and his support of racism, and that the only explanation for the negative comments was that Flakko had organized some kind of massive, coordinated harassment campaign involving multiple accounts. The reality of this situation is far simpler and far more straightforward than Richard Cisco's paranoid conspiracy theories, because people just simply do not like racist people and do not like individuals who support and defend racist behavior on the internet. There's no grand conspiracy, there's no coordinated network of accounts working together. There's just regular people who have seen Chud engage in racist behavior and who have heard Richard Cisco defend that behavior and who have watched Richard Cisco attack people who criticize Chud. And those people have decided that they do not want to engage with either of these individuals anymore. Subscribe because Richard Cisco's mental health crisis has gotten so severe and so public that he is now claiming to have documental evidence on people and is threatening to file reports with law enforcement agencies and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. In his direct messages to random accounts, Richard Cisco started claiming that he has people's personal information and that he has contacted law enforcement and filed reports claiming that there is some kind of mob coordination and conspiracy happening orchestrated by Poetik Flakko. Richard Cisco even threatened to use this alleged documentation as the basis for multiple lawsuits that he claimed he would file against anyone who he believes is connected to Poetik Flakko or who has commented negatively on his social media accounts. He claimed he had evidence linking various people to Flakko and that everyone who attacked him after Flakko got linked to that attack would face 3 separate lawsuits. Richard Cisco's threats became increasingly granular and increasingly specific as his paranoia spiraled further out of control. What is absolutely ironic about Richard Cisco's threats is that he is the person who has been spreading lies and making defamatory statements about Poetik Flakko, and yet he is the one threatening lawsuits and FBI involvement against Flakko and anyone who agrees with Flakko. Richard Cisco is trying to use threats and intimidation tactics in an attempt to silence people who are speaking out against racism and defending the integrity of black communities. The irony is completely lost on Richard Cisco because he is so caught up in his paranoia and his mental health crisis that he cannot see how ridiculous and unfounded his claims actually are. Poetik Flakko mentioned in his video that he was still planning to organize a peaceful march in Richard Cisco's neighborhood to serve him with a cease and desist notice.
On us, good luck. Sir, we don't commit crimes. Good luck.
And to send a message to the community that harassment and bigotry and racism are not tolerated in that area. When Richard Cisco heard about this planned peaceful march, which is completely legal and constitutionally protected, he completely lost it and started claiming that organizing a peaceful protest is equivalent to organizing a mob, and that it somehow constitutes a federal crime that the FBI would need to investigate and prosecute. Richard Cisco apparently called the FBI and tried to file a report claiming that Poetik Flakko and his community were planning to commit some kind of federal crime by simply exercising their constitutional right to peaceful protest and to march in a public neighborhood. The absurdity of this claim is absolutely breathtaking because there is nothing illegal about organizing a peaceful march in someone's neighborhood. There's nothing criminal about serving someone with a cease and desist notice, and there's absolutely nothing that the FBI would be interested in investigating or prosecuting. What Richard Cisco is doing here is a classic intimidation tactic that is designed to make people afraid of exercising their constitutional rights and to silence criticism and exposure of racist behavior. Richard Cisco is making threats and filing frivolous reports with law enforcement as a desperate attempt to intimidate and silence people who are criticizing him, and criticizing Chud for engaging in racist behavior on social media and in public spaces. When these tactics fail to intimidate Flakko, Richard Cisco escalates to claiming that he has hacked or accessed people's personal information and that he can get people deported or face federal charges. The level of desperation that Richard Cisco is displaying is absolutely pathetic, because he is a 40-plus-year-old man with apparently no job and no purpose in life other than defending a racist live streamer who is currently facing attempted murder charges. Richard Cisco is so committed to defending Chud that he is willing to have a public mental health breakdown and make false reports to federal law enforcement, which is itself a crime that could result in criminal charges against Richard Cisco. The irony of the situation is that Richard Cisco seems to have forgotten about freedom of speech and freedom of expression when it comes to people criticizing and attacking him and Chud. But he was perfectly fine with Chud's team using freedom of speech as a defense when Chud was going around calling black people the N-word and harassing them online. This selective application of principles shows that Richard Cisco was never actually concerned with principles at all. He was just looking for convenient excuses to defend his preferred candidate. Peace.